Tēnā katoa, or Anne Schlesselmann toko ingoa, and I'm a conservation ecology researcher at Manaki Whenua Lenkia Research based in Otepoti, Dunedin. Today's talk is mostly an update on ongoing work that I've been doing with many others. And so it's a bit of a mix of what have we done so far, what have we learned, but also a lot of where are we going with this and what are the future things that we want to learn from it. Just to go straight into it, almost every animal has the capacity to move to varying degrees, and that can come in different forms. So on the one hand, there's routine movements that's quite often on the scale of sort of tens of kilometers. And Colin nicely showed those pictures of turn tracking that showed that where birds are nesting can be quite different to where birds are roosting at night, and often tens of kilometers away. Next, there's of course dispersal movements, so they can be quite often in the range of tens to hundreds of kilometers. And most of them are sort of natal dispersal movements. And so as an example here, there's a handful of kaki that are now breeding in the Rangitata River that have obviously hatched in Twizel and have done the jump across the mountain range. Other forms of dispersal can be breeding dispersal, so changing breeding locations after attempts, or the opposite of also in the non-breeding season of moving locations around. Then there are nomadic movements. They are quite often on larger scales, so it can be sort of in the order of hundreds of kilometers. Black-billed gulls are sort of one great example of that they follow food resources around, and it's not often that predictable of where you will actually encounter black-billed gull colonies. And then the last part, those are the other end of the spectrum, the really predictable side of seasonal migration, which can be up to thousands of kilometers. And the key example, I guess, for us is the banded dotterel, Tōrea. That is one of only two birds that actually breeds in New Zealand and moves offshore, or part of the population moves to Australia for the winter. Recent work by Emma Williams and others has shown that 57% of New Zealand's threatened species spend part of their annual or life cycle outside of DOC's protected area network. And when we look at the iconic braided river bird species, that's all of them. And that throws up some challenges, two sort of major knowledge gaps. And one of them is really the population trends and drivers of these. And that's complicated by those animals being very mobile, because it's difficult to then point down, well, is it recruitment or is it survival that is driving population trends? And when and where does it happen? Is it survival during the breeding grounds? Is it overwintering, and at what life stage? And the other part is, we don't even know exactly always where they go. So which breeding sites are connected to which wintering sites, and which areas in between do they use? In order to actually pick away at this challenge, we've combined forces. And so in 2020, we started a collaboration with the Department of Conservation and Birds New Zealand. And all of us came together with different interests, but decided to focus on Tōrea because either there were existing projects already, or we both could see the benefit of focusing on one key species. And so the Department of Conservation is very interested in gaining more information on flyways and nodes, because that information feeds directly into RMA applications and informing those. Birds New Zealand is really interested in being able to contribute their local expertise all around the country into conservation. And particularly for me, my interest lies in being able to develop a spatial population model and get at that part of what are the population trends and the drivers of these. So together, the plan is that we actually know how we can maximize the benefit from conservation management for these mobile species and develop a framework for other of those braided river bird species. Since we've started that work, other people have come on board, and that's been really incredibly important and helpful for us. So the Pukoko Miranda Naturalist Trust has come on board, and they are working in one of the major wintering spots for many of those braided river birds in Miranda. Then Environment Canterbury Regional Council has supported some work on the ground here in Canterbury, and the Otago Regional Council is supporting wintering work down in Otago. What has happened so far? On the right here, you can see a map with our study sites. So right at the top, as I just mentioned, is the Tōrea Naturalist Trust. And they carry out regular catches of wintering birds. They use red-coloured flags to mark individuals, and a subset of these birds have also had little GPS trackers attached in conjunction with the Department of Conservation. And the local people at Tōrea Naturalist Trust have also been really great for advocating for these birds, and also having loads of people out on the ground looking for birds and banded birds. Birds New Zealand had an ongoing project in Golden Bay and Tasman area, and they have been for quite a while already using yellow flags as their marking technique. And similarly, they've been carrying out regular catches during the winter, the non-breeding season. And again, all birds are banded, and a subset of these, in conjunction with the Department of Conservation, had GPS tags attached. The blue sites is again the Department of Conservation, together with Birds New Zealand, carrying out catches around different wintering sites in the South Island, with again the main aim being for birds to be banded and marked of where they're wintering, and a subset carrying GPS tags. And then Manaki Whenua has focused on an inland breeding site, and we are using orange flagging, but we're also doing a range of other things at the Rangitata site. And the reason for that is that, again, coming back to that, wanting to understand the population trends and drivers of these. So if we briefly look at the annual cycle of a Tōrea, starting at the top, we've got the inland breeding that's going to start in a couple of months, roundabout sort of from September to December. And then during that time, adults nest, chicks hatch and fledge. And then both adults and those newly fledglings move at about sort of January to March to the wintering ground. Both those adults, new fledglings, and other younger birds need to survive the non-breeding season to then start the circle again, at least for the breeding adults, to come back, which happens about now, sort of July, August, that they're moving back to those breeding grounds. The main point is that we have got all of these different vital rates of survival and recruitment of different life stages that happen at different places all over New Zealand. And all of these together drives the population dynamic of the entire national population. So it's really hard to disentangle of what happens where has which influence on the population as a whole. In order to actually unpick this, the plan is to use an integrated population model, and that is, by integrated, I mean that it uses different data types and actually combines the information from those different data types to learn about the different vital rates and those, and then inform, well, I guess which one of these vital rates drive the population trends. So here on the left, I'm going to show now which data we have already collected and how it all fits together. We've got F stands for fecundity, so it's reproduction data that we have collected over the last 3 years ourselves in the Rangitata, and that is to add to already existing data from lowland areas in the South Island and also in the Mackenzie Basin. And I just want to briefly take you into the field on a generally average day, the Rangitata. And it's quite amazing that not only field staff but also the SIPO seem to kind of cope relatively well with the weather up there. And the next aspect is the survival. And the important bit here is that because we are starting, or we have worked at a breeding site, we have been able to band birds that we know exactly when they hatch, so of known age, and are able to understand the survival of different age classes of breeders, but also of birds that are non-breeders and only entering the breeding stage over the following years. And I just want to say thank you to the many people that have sent me pictures or even just emails of birds that I have seen all across New Zealand. This information is hugely helpful, and it's not only actually the part that we learn about the survival, but also the aspect of learning about which sites are connected. So some of these re-sightings have come just from north of Wellington, others from the Bay of Plenty, from around Auckland, around Miranda, even as far north as the Kaipara Harbour. And in addition, we are also carrying out our own re-site surveys in the Rangitata River. And if you haven't spotted it, this is one of the adults flying. So it takes a lot of patience quite often to read bands, and a slightly more bluebird day up in the stunning headwaters. The next aspect that feeds into this is the GPS data that I alluded to. So a subset of individuals carry GPSs, which again provides information on flyways I'm going to present shortly, but also these devices allow us to get up-to-date information on survival, because one of our concerns was that we obviously don't have observers all around New Zealand distributed equally. So it's really wanting to understand, do we not see individuals or do they actually not make it through to certain life stages? And then the other two data sets that we are pulling in are around population trends, and those are these long-term data that I would say, worth their weight in gold. So that's the BRaid River Bird Survey data that Miles talked about this morning, but also the winter wader count data that has been collected by Birds New Zealand over similar timeframes. And together, all of these data types give information on one part or several parts of the vital rates, and together they can borrow information off each other to inform population trends. And this is an example from overseas on a European bird. If I'm correct, it's a woodchat shrike. And just on the left, you can see adult survival on the x-axis, population growth rate on the y-axis. So if it's about 1, that means the population is stable. Above 1 means the population is increasing. Below 1 means decreasing. And the point of this graph is that you can then, with these models, look at how closely population growth rate varies with vital rates. So you can do that for various vital rates. And in this case, there's sort of a so-so relationship with adult survival. And the other opportunity that I really find quite exciting is that you can actually look at different scenarios of, well, what if we were to do nothing, if we were to increase productivity, or if we were to reduce the variability in adult survival? And what are the outcomes on a population level for that? So on the graph on the right, we've got extinction probability and then years into the future. And we can see that actually for this bird species, increasing productivity compared to no action is almost the same outcome. But, reducing the temporal variability in adult survival and no action is actually more or less the same outcome. But if you were able to increase productivity, you can almost halve the likelihood of the extinction of that population. And so coming back, I now want to focus a bit more on the flyways and stopover sites and just present of what we have learned so far from that. And just at the start, because we have already been talking a bit about the rangitata, I just want to show how even just from one breeding site, birds actually end up at completely different spots dotted around the country just by migrating at about sort of December to March. And when I started this work, I was initially working on black-fronted terns, and overseas terns had been shown with data loggers that they mostly follow river courses. So that was my expectation with what would Tōrea do here as well. And I was actually quite stumped when the first data came in and birds just went straight across the Southern Alps. And then across, if they go to the North Island, across sort of the Taranaki Bight, and then just follow the coastline. And so initially I was sitting there after sort of autumn and thinking of like, oh, well, probably at least when they come down south, they will follow the rivers back up to their breeding site. But when we actually looked at the spring migration, it's more or less the same flight path, and again, straight across the Southern Alps. And those data loggers have shown that they can actually reach a maximum height of about 4,000 meters across above sea level. So it's incredible what these birds can achieve. And also flight speeds of about 160 kilometers per hour, which we think is actually wind assisted, but that will require a bit more overlaying with wind maps of when the migration actually occurred. In terms of timing of movement, that was another interesting bit, because for the first time we were able to actually put GPS tags on fledglings and see where they go for the first time. And one of the questions was always, well, do they just follow their parents around and then that's the way to learn how to go? Or do they just kind of start flying and just find their own way? And here we can see on the x-axis, that's, if you roughly think the day number in a year. So 1 is actually January the 1st and going through to about December. And then you can see the frequency of what we have recorded so far from the rangitata. And the blue lines are the juveniles. And so far it looks like they're actually going slightly earlier than the adults. And that sort of matches of what we have observed on the ground in the field. So when we look at tracks, that seems also to suggest that they're actually just exploring on their own and just taking flight. So these are all first migrations of fledglings from the rangitata. And we can see that some of those actually, similar to the adults, go straight across the Southern Alps, but we also do have some interesting candidates. One of them is hanging out at Lake Brunner, quite happily there. Others have just decided to do actually what I expected them to do and go down the river course and then along the coast. And another one that I want to highlight is this bird here, just north of Wellington. And it initially checked an estuary out, but then after a day or two was like, well, actually, how about somewhere else? And flew to Hawke's Bay and all the way back again to where it came from, where it now happily hangs out. So it's been really incredible to actually see where these birds have ended up. And just to briefly show, so yeah, there's some overlap with the adults. They're shown in orange again, but also the fledglings just go off on their own sort of mini OEs. And this is just an animation to really bring back home that point of these birds are not just in one place, they're actually connecting sites and connecting people. And so right at the top, you've got the timeline. So we're kind of getting close to birds coming back to breeding sites, and now they're coming back to breeding sites, they're all spending their time inland, getting kind of close to December, and birds are going back to the coastal sites, to their overwintering sites. And even in their overwintering sites, they're doing little movements and now coming back to breeding sites again. And we're going back up north again. So as a brief summary, we would love your help. So if you're out doing a braided river bird survey or just here on the coast, and you happen to see a Tōrea, please look at their legs if they're carrying a band and send me an email or go online on the Doc Banding Office homepage and you can report that sighting. And as we've seen again and again and again today, data is really what makes the difference in terms of being able to know what's going on. So that really feeds into knowing which sites are connected, but also that survival data is really important. Second, I hope that I have been able to actually show you how all of these different data sets that have been collected over time can be actually used and combined to inform in the future what are the drivers of these population trends and how can we then use that to test what are best management scenarios. Should we focus on, be it wintering survival rather than summer survival, or so on. And last, these flyaway and flight characteristics that we have learned so far have been actually really critical for informing where suitable wind farm locations are. So although this work is ongoing, this information has been already hugely useful in being able to, instead of having people guessing what is good or what is bad, to actually have data to show where suitable or less suitable sites are. And with that, I would quite like to just thank everybody that has been involved in some form or other at that work, and also acknowledge our whenua. Runaka.